Karina Maibek, and Jung Yu-jung, Jung Se-won, Yu Jae-won, and Lauren Provang, Li Lingxian, Piao Chenhui, and Park Geun. So we are about 20 people gathered to have Professor Oh Chang Rhyong's presentation. I'm really very happy to have him as a presenter of today. Professor Oh is now working at the Nordic-Benelux Centre as a research professor, and he is an expert of French politics. And he was doing a small project I have organized on the reconciliation diplomacy of European countries and the implications for East Asia. And he's in charge of this part. The topic he's now presenting on, which is German-French reconciliation process after the Second World War. And he will look at the Elysee Treaty and Aachen Treaty, so the process of making the treaties and how it has been contributing to the betterment of the bilateral relations of the two countries, right? So I would be very happy to have his presentation here, and let us have a very constructive and interesting discussion. I was informed that a few students have already put some questions pre-registered. And probably these questions can be answered during his presentation, because almost all pre-research questions have dealt with what he would like to present today, right? So let us have him to present, and then after that, let's have discussion. Thank you, and have a nice time. So Professor Oh, why don't you start?
Okay. Can you hear my voice clearly? Okay. Can you see the screen? Okay. I'm Chang Rhyong Oh, research professor at the Nordic-Benelux Centre, and I'm very happy to share my ideas on this occasion. And first of all, I would like to thank you, Professor Park Sung-hoon and the EU Centre for giving me this opportunity. And thank you for the students here. And my title is the Reconciliation Diplomacy between Germany and France. And this presentation will take about 30 minutes, and I hope you can enjoy this presentation. The content is, my research is especially about the Elysee Treaty in 1963 and the Aachen Treaty in 2019, which has formed Franco-German reconciliation for about 60 years. And I will focus on the Franco-German reconciliation process between the two treaties. And finally, I'd like to introduce some implications for the current situation of East Asia and Korea-Japan relations. Okay. France and Germany have a very long history of hostility, and wars between the two countries, such as the Franco-Russian War in 1870 and World War I and II, were the main sources of such hostility. In order to overcome this hostility, the Elysee Treaty was signed in 1963, but it has been said that the actual effects were not huge, not tangible at the time. On the other hand, the Aachen Treaty, signed in 2019, updated the Elysee Treaty, and the two countries agreed on stronger cooperation. The picture here shows de Gaulle and Adenauer signing the Elysee Treaty in 1963. But why and how was the bilateral treaty signed again in 2019? Existing research has focused on international environmental changes, such as Brexit, Russian military threat, unilateralism of Trump administration. International insecurity may increase the need for bilateral cooperation between France and Germany. However, the Iron Treaty contained very controversial provisions regarding French and German relations, while the treaty was prepared very fast without conflict between two countries. So my question is whether the internal factors or bilateral factors also influenced the signing of the Iron Treaty. And I think this point has some implications for Korea, Japan, and East Asian relations. Existing studies have introduced various variables to explain interstate reconciliation, as you see here. History, leadership, institution, or international or environmental context, or timing, etc. I think these variables can be categorized into hot and cold factors. Hot factors refers to leadership or timing. It means a more emotional impact. It can have emotional impact on public opinion. On the other hand, the cold factors means a more fixed and more rational dimension, such as political institutions or regular meetings. According to the previous studies, Alger Treaty was more influenced by the role of leaders, so the hot factors may be considered more important. Next page. I'm trying to develop this distinction more theoretically. Hot and cold cognitions are concepts maybe accepted to many psychologists. And this concept is in cognitive psychology. Hot cognition is a mental process influenced by emotion, and it can be very fast and automatic, but sometimes a biased thinking. Yeah. And on the other hand, core cognition is more likely to involve logic and critical analysis, and is likely to be independent of the emotions. So when following this distinction, special events and ceremonies, reader friendship will probably stimulate this hot cognition, so they can be the hot factors of reconciliation. And regular summits, Council of Ministers, and annual exchange program will be will trigger cold factors. So it can be cold cognition. So it can be cold factors of reconciliation. I think a Franco-German reconciliation process have been formed with these two factors, and these two factors have changed people's attitude toward reconciliation between two countries and could create a sense of friendship. Adenauer and de Gaulle signed the Alger Treaty in Paris on January 12, 2012, 1963, but the treaty got a contradictory evaluation. As I already mentioned, some said the treaty failed to produce tangible result, but others said it was the Franco-German diplomatic revolution, or the very essential step toward European integration. The treaty could seem revolutionary because negotiations for reconciliation between the countries had been very, very difficult. It was the leaders who opened up the conversation again. And de Gaulle and Adenauer held the first meeting at de Gaulle's hometown in 1958, and in the following summits in 1959, the two leaders promised to strengthen Franco-German relationship. And this picture shows the first meeting between de Gaulle and Adenauer at de Gaulle's hometown, Colombe-les-Deux-Églises. However, because of different national interests between the two countries, the two leaders clashed for years. And French nuclear weapon test and European integration process were the main topics of conflict. And French foreign policies toward Russia were also the cause of conflict. At the time, the cooperation with Russia was a very sensitive issue for West Germany. And de Gaulle-Adenauer relationship has rapidly cooled down since 1960. Okay. But two leaders overcame the conflict through symbolic events. The meeting of Lens Cathedral here in 1962 was an important step toward the Allied Treaty. A scene here where the leaders stand together to attend the Mass represented the will of reconcile of the two leaders. Actually, religion was a common denominator between the two countries, and the leaders may have mobilized the religious feeling of the people. Since then, negotiations have progressed so fast. On January 12, 1963, the first protocol was drafted, and just 10 days later, the leaders signed the Allied Treaty. So finally, the 5-year dialogue between the leaders paid off with the Allied Treaty in 1963. The agreements are as follows: consultation on diplomatic issues between the two countries, joint military cooperation, establishment of education organization to promote youth exchange, and regular bilateral summits. Unfortunately, the tangible achievement was only the third at the time. Existing studies have regarded a Franco-German Youth Office as a major, maybe only achievement of the Allied Treaty. But the problem was that the German parliament added a separate heading to the treaty. It argued that relations with the US and the UK were also important to Germany. So at this point, the Allied Treaty was evaluated as an unsuccessful agreement. And 56 years later, the Iron Treaty was signed in 2019 under the name of Allied Treaty version 2.0, and French President Macron and German Chancellor Merkel signed the treaty on the 56th anniversary of the Allied Treaty. The goal of Iron Treaty was convergence of German-French interests. So this second treaty promised stronger cooperation, and they decided to introduce a Franco-German Defense and Security Council and a Franco-German Council of Economic Experts and cross-border cooperation and joint citizens fund, etc. This is the picture of Macron and Merkel signing the Aachen Treaty last year. And the main argument of the Aachen Treaty are as follows: promoting an effective and strong common foreign and security policy, and strengthening the economic and monetary union between the countries, and regular consultation at all levels prior to major European meetings, and converging security objectives and strategies. However, the most notable item was Article 8, which asserts France should support German campaign for UN Security Council permanent seat as a priority of Franco-German diplomacy. This was not only significant change in bilateral relation between France and Germany, but also could be considered very negative for other EU member states. Okay. Overall, the Aachen Treaty showed firmly defended principles of cooperation. However, it is surprising that the agreements were reached so fast despite the strong domestic and international criticism of the Article 8. In December 2017, Macron insisted the need to sign a new treaty, and Macron and Merkel have announced that a new treaty will be ready by the end of 2018, and in January 2019, the Aachen Treaty was signed. So Macron's first plan was to announce a new treaty in 1 month, just 1 month, and it was delayed slightly, and new treaty was born in just 13 months after the first claim. So we can ask again, how could the Aachen Treaty be agreed so fast without conflicts compared to the former, the LE Treaty in 1963? That is my main question of this presentation. Okay, when considering the issues of Korea-Japan relations, hot factors such as leadership between France and Germany can be an important reference because Franco-German leaders found a way out of a long-standing hostility between the two countries. But it is also worth paying attention to the institution matters. My argument is that the institution of regular Franco-German summits was crucial for signing of Aachen Treaty. The point is that the summits between two countries have been held since 1963. And here you can see the list of leaders of France and Germany and their towns and their political parties. And interestingly, it have been only 10 years, I marked here, only 10 years since the 1970s that ideologically identical political parties took office simultaneously in both countries. In other words, the Franco-German leaders continued to hold regular meetings twice a year, regardless of regime changes. Actually, regular summits were one of the promises of the Elysee Treaty. Of course, there have been endless conflicts at the summit. Leaders constantly clashed over agriculture or economic policies, defense and foreign policies, and the way of European integration. Good relationships were very, very rare, and Giscard d'Estaing, Schmidt, and Sarkozy-Merkel couple were the examples of good partnership. And Mitterrand here, and Mitterrand and Kohl leadership moved the people by visiting the World War II cemetery together hand in hand. But the rest of couples all experienced conflict, and even the best couples didn't always have a good relationship. Okay. Nevertheless, in 2003, both countries upgraded Franco-German summits and launched new regular meetings called Franco-German Council of Ministers. Despite the conflicts, there have been a total of 80 summits till 2003, and more systematic cooperation was institutionalized at the highest level since 2003. They thought of very comprehensive cooperation since then, and they announced the 40th anniversary joint declaration. And here, these four figures are the world crowd based on Alger Treaty here and Aachen Treaty and 40th anniversary joint declaration and a Franco-German cooperation agenda 2020 published in 2010. Okay. And the size of each word reflects its frequency. Here, special words do not stand out, and it can be interpreted that specific issues were not prominent because they dealt with very comprehensive issues. In other words, since the treaties cover many issues evenly and very comprehensively, only the word cooperation here, only the cooperation stand out. And this, the 2003 declaration and 2010 cooperation agenda can be the answer to the question, how the Aachen Treaty agreed so fast. 2003 and 2010 comprehensive agreements between the two countries have structures and contents very similar to the Aachen Treaty. This means that since 2003, the Council of Ministers has cooperated in each field and collected the result of each discussion in one comprehensive agreement. So it can be argued that the Aachen Treaty has been prepared for 16 years since 2003. And with continuous meetings between the leaders and ministers. And here, under the point here is the question of how much the existing agreements or treaties refer to the reconciliation itself. What is the correct answer to this question? How many times can you find the word reconciliation in the Alger Treaty? Please give your answer by chat or by microphone. Yeah, it's your turn. Okay. How many times appears the word reconciliation in the Alger Treaty? I couldn't prepare any prize here, but I'll buy some coffee later. So please give me a correct answer to this question.
Reconciliation.
How many times? Yeah. Please give me any answer to this question. It's just a number. Yeah.
So Bakao says 50 times. Lauren,
okay.
100.
Oh, 100.
Karina, 15. Kim Min-ju, 75.
Wow.
Jung
I think
Yu-jung,
there
10
is,
times.
yeah.
Jo Soo-jung, 28.
Yeah.
How come you have 28? You counted it? Jo Soo-jung.
Wow.
So what is the right
answer?
answer?
But there is no correct answer here. Yeah.
I would say no times, 0 time. Is it right?
More than 0. Yeah.
More than
more
0?
Than 0.
More than
yeah.
0, okay.
Yeah, but less than we may think. Yeah. Between
So
1 and
7.
10.
Jung Se-won 5 times.
Oh, 5 times. Okay. The correct answer is just once. Yeah, just once.
Okay.
Yes. It appears once just in the first sentence. Then the word reconciliation disappears in the Alger Treaty. You can only see the content of cooperation instead of reconciliation in the treaty. In a special lecture last week, Professor Bilsing compared national or interstate reconciliation to a more individual reconciliation. And I think sometimes family members or friends break our heart, your heart, but when we get out of conflicts, we don't talk much about reconciliation itself in ordinary life. And apology is also important, maybe it's important. However, a constant action is essential, such as talking again and hanging out together in order to recover the broken heart. And talking a lot about the reconciliation itself may not help, I think. So we need to find out more why the early theory did not talk about the reconciliation itself. But the fact is that the early theory only mentioned the word reconciliation once is, I think, is the most important point to reconsider the meaning of the early theory. Okay, and I'll continue to the next page. Okay. Now I'll introduce some implications of Franco-German reconciliation for East Asia. According to Professor Lily Feldman, the early treaty can be a reconciliation model for other countries in that it can be a public commitment that could be recalled again and again, and civil society actors participated in the reconciliation process of the France and Germany, and institutionalized relations could create predictability and reliability. And this is my argument about the first question. And Adenauer said friendship between France and Germany is like a rose that will always have buds and flowers and thorns. And Willy Brandt said the reconciliation requires careful spade work. Spade work can be translated into Korean as 삽질. And in Korean, 삽질 means hard work that need to be done over and over meaninglessly. And you can see spade work or 삽질 in this painting here. But I would like to argue that careful and time-consuming spade work is necessary to improve relations between Korea and Japan. And here, 112 is the number of times that the Franco-German summits were held before the signing of the Iron Treaty. And 112 symbolizes the core factors of Franco-German reconciliation here in blue color. And the pictures here, left here, are the historical moment when the leaders of the two countries joined hands together. And as I have already mentioned, sometimes the friendship image of the leaders can make a breakthrough or mobilize some friendship, a feeling of friendship of the people, but seemingly boring or persistent institutions may have a greater influence from a long-term perspective. That is my another argument. And so my conclusion is, even if reconciliation is initiated by leadership, institutional design is necessary. And in the case of Franco-German reconciliation, multi-level meetings contributed to a comprehensive framework of reconciliation, despite continued conflict between the two leaders. And this case, Franco-German case, gives a lesson to South Korea, ROK, and Japan that patience is needed for a long-term reconciliation. And finally, here, these are the wonderful images created by Franco-German Youth Office. And they are actually postcards decorated with cultural symbols of France and Germany. And here, troc means exchange. So exchange Eiffel Tower for the Berlin television tower, for example, here. And each image is, also promotes FGYO's program here. And these are very interesting and pretty images. And my favorite image is the croissant and pretzel here. And French and German youth may be able to discuss Molière and Goethe together. If the goal of reconciliation is to enjoy and share a richer culture of both countries, I think it is worth pursuing. And this is the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Oh, for very interesting presentation. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Last week we had Professor Virishing, and he was talking about two main elements of reconciliation. He mentioned about political factors and cultural factors. But Professor Oh comes up with another very good idea to distinguish between hot factors and cold factors. And these two, I mean, different approaches would make the project more colorful. But I think that another implication of Professor Oh's presentation is that even though the two countries, France and Germany, had the Alger Treaty in 1963, the relationship was not always good, right? They had conflicts, not only bilateral, but also in relation to European integration as well. However, they have overcome these all obstacles, and that is the most important part of our study, how they have overcome. And Professor Oh's thesis is that institutionalization, right, method. Probably we have some other factors to consider. Before we have got the presentation by Professor Oh started, we received 5 pre-registered questions, but I think almost all of them have been answered during his presentation. So the questioners I'd like to list up: Kim Min-ji, Park Ga-eun, Nam Sang-wook, Lorraine Provin, and Jung Se-won. So among the 5 of these students, do you have any questions left unanswered? Then please raise your questions. So, Kim Min-ji, what about you?
No, I think it is enough.
Okay. Park Ga-eun, are you there?
Yes, I feel like my question was also sufficiently answered. Thank you.
Okay, show your face if possible. Nam Sang-wook, are you there as well? I cannot see your name. Okay. Lauren?
Yes, it was.
So you
yes,
are
it was.
GSI student and you are from France?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Is your question answered?
Yes, it was. Thanks.
More or less, right? Right.
Yes.
And now we have last but not least, Jung Se-won. What about your question?
Yes, Professor. I guess my question was answered fully through the lecture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then let us open the floor. So is there anybody who would like to ask some questions? I see Professor Yu Jae-kwang of Gyeonggi University present in the room, and also Dr. Yoon Seung-hwan, and Kim Min-ji is there. So you are free to ask any questions to Professor Oh. Anybody?
Okay, so
No questions?
I will go first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Professor Yu.
Yeah. In the last meeting, I mean, also today meeting, I mean, it's June conference. I mean, we pretty much talk about whether or not the experience of a reconciliation between Germany and France is can be replicable or applicable to East Asian context. I mean, I'm still a little bit, I mean, curious about whether or not you believe the experience of Germany and France can be applicable to rapprochement or reconciliation between South Korea and Japan. I mean, there are huge literature in international relations. I mean, such a simple comparison between the European experience and the Asian experience is out of context because, I mean, initial conditions, those countries are, I mean, the way those countries end the hostility quite different, I mean, from continent to continent. So, I mean, this is my question. I mean, for example, in Germany, I mean, a large numbers of, I mean, Nazis or so-called revisionists or hardliners, I mean, eliminated and purged and sentenced to death. And in Japan, right after World War II, such a kind of, I mean, and the penalizing, I mean, criminals was not that harsh. I mean, was not there, I mean, in Japan right after World War II. So that means, I mean, some of the politicians and the political elites in Japan has constantly attempt to revise, I mean, their stance, I mean, over their brutal imperial rule over lots of Asian countries. So, I mean, my question once again, I mean, simple experience of Germany and France, I mean, reconciliation or the rapprochement or whatever can be applicable or replicable to East Asian context. I mean, that's my question.
So before Professor O answers the question, I think my intention to include the case study of France and German reconciliation process was not that we can replicate or we can repeat what they have done in the East Asian context or in the bilateral Korea-Japan relations. But probably we can learn from their experiences how they have done that and what kind of elements we can pick to apply for the betterment of the bilateral relations. I think we have plenty of lessons to learn, but the contexts are so different, so we cannot apply directly. However, Professor O may have some idea how to and what to apply for our case study. So, Professor O?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Very important question and very difficult. So, I think it is impossible to replicate the Franco-German case to the East Asian or Japan and Korea case, but I think we can some implications. It is not a fixed model, but we can have some implication in Franco-German reconciliation. That is, the point is that the lesson of Franco-German reconciliation is that the individual issues, individual disputes can be discussed through cooperation for more long-term regular meetings, or cooperation could be pursued without resolving individual disputes in advance. That is my point. And it may be impossible to completely resolve the Dokdo dispute or the comfort women issues or apology or compensation issues in the near future. But I think cooperation between Korea and Japan will be possible while dealing with various disputes. And this point may be the major lesson, major point of the Franco-German reconciliation. That's my answer. Yeah, thank you.
So Professor Yu is also participating in our project. And after we collected all the manuscripts, so we would like to have some workshop and let us discuss some more in detail how we can use the case study of each relations for our East Asia case. I have forgotten to mention about the sponsor of this event. I should do it in the beginning, but I'd like to do it now because for the record. I mean, all the project about reconciliation diplomacy is sponsored by KIEP, Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. KIEP provides a fund for educating the graduate student for the area studies, and the GPS we call. GPS Europe program was awarded to GSIS Korea University. And this is now done, right? In form of project, in form of special lectures. And this special lecture, the one we had last week, the one of this week, and on Thursday we have another special lecture. And next week, December 10, we have another lecture. So these 4 lectures are sponsored by KIEP, and also it's sponsored by the European Union, because we have the program of Chang Monnet EU Centre of Excellence, right? It was awarded last year from the European Union for 3 years to GSIS Korea University, and the EU Centre is leading this and managing these various programs. So anybody else who has some questions or comments?
Hello from EU Center.
Okay, Ojayan.
Actually, I really enjoyed your presentation. It was lovely, especially because I am very interested in Japan country itself. And also your presentation was, I think, really engaging in that it generated the discussion back and forth, and also some of the intriguing questions and timely questions I had. And especially after listening to your response to the first question, I came up with my own about what are some of the elements and factors that are essential to reconciliation that you mentioned during your presentation, but also at the same time lacking in Korea and Japan relations.
That is the end of question.
Yeah, it is actually the end of the question. It's the only question.
Okay. Can I answer now? Or?
Yes.
Okay. That is a very tricky question. I cannot choose one point or one factor for the reconciliation between Korea and Japan. But I think the institution matters, as I already mentioned during the presentation. If you look it up on Google, you can find many pictures that the Japan and Korea leaders joined hands together, and there are so many images. Already we have many images, and actually Japanese government insists that they have made enough apologies before, and you can have more information, much more information about their effort to apology for their colonial history. But these kind of the images or the more the readers' effort to make some change between Korea and Japan, I think had had not enough impact for improving the Korean-Japan real relationship so far. So I think more important step toward the real reconciliation could be supported by the more systematic institution that cannot be changed, like even though there are some kind of the regime changes, the system should be persist and should support more cooperation and more reconciliation. I think reconciliation is not the real state, just the process. So institutions should support the process for the more stable relation between the two countries. That is my answer. Okay, thank you.
If I can add something, I'd like to say that Professor O said institution matters, and also he showed the number 112 summit meetings they have held right so far. And these summit meetings are not only having talks between the two leaders, but also it's process of trust building. And the trust building process we have forgotten and we have ignored, right? By making people in charge, so presidents, prime ministers, ministers, the director generals, they meet, even though they have different and difficult relations, different opinions, they have met regularly. And by doing so, they have been able to build up trust. And that is most important. And the trust building process is, in my view, what lacks in the bilateral Korea-Japan relations. But I am confident that I strongly believe that it is not too late to start now, right? Because we have to start, and then 10, 20 years later, the fruits will be there. And you can, for instance, reap the fruits of this effort. That is my strong belief. Okay, other people. So it's a really very rare opportunity that we talk about reconciliation. And another thing I'd like to say, add to this seminar is that in recent days in Korean society, there is a request to do Big Bang approach, right? The leaders, they should get together and they should have 통큰 양보, 통큰 정치, Big Bang approach. I don't believe that is helpful. Of course, the Big Bang approach can help to destroy this stalemate and improve a little bit about the relationship. However, more important is the process of meeting together and in doing so, accumulating the dialogues and then trust building. And this is more important rather than the Big Bang approach some Korean politicians and Korean opinion leaders would like to have. And that is really very risky. You can have a Big Bang approach this year. However, when political changes are taking place in Japan and Korea next time, then in 2 years or so, you can not do that. We had the Kim Dae-jung Obuchi Declaration, and somebody has done some study. Ms. Hasoi, do you have anything to report to us? So what do you feel about the Japanese, Korea-Japanese doing in this regard, and how the things were developed? after Kim Dae-jung Obuchi Declaration?
In my opinion, I think the most difficult reason why the reason that Korea, Japan make very hard to just achieve the reconciliation is about the perceptions. Because according to the recent research about the Korean and Japanese perceptions, the negative perceptions has gradually increasing. So I think as you mentioned, the Big Bang approaches is also important, but I think the more important thing is about just the people's perceptions. That is the
Perception is, I mean, would be improved when they have trust, mutual trust.
Yeah, I
right?
agree.
Yeah. So lacking trust is leading to more kind of worsened perception to each other. Also, Professor O mentioned about the civil society's relevance of civil society engagement. And I strongly support this view because without the civil society's engagement, the institutionalization would have only not so only minimal impact will have only minimum impact, so that the I mean, institutionalization and the political process should be accompanied by cultural and societal process. So we have to have the parallel approach with the political and cultural, as noted by Professor Wilishing last week. That probably is the lesson we can draw from these two special lectures by Professor Wilishing and Professor Oh. Any other questions?
May I ask a question?
Okay, Kaun, please.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for your lecture. My name is Kaun, and I'm a student from the Division of International Studies. To my understanding, there's a lot of far-right parties that are gaining more political party in Europe, even in Germany and France, like Marine Le Pen. So I was wondering if there was nationwide consensus for the Aachen Treaty, or if there were divides among political lines, and also if there were divides and the far-right parties did not approve, are there measures in this treaty that help it like withstand regime change? So even if a regime that dislikes the treaty steps in, are there like more institutional measures in place?
Okay. Okay, thank you for your very important question. As you said, in France, the far-right parties and far-right supporters extremely got the position of against the Aachen Treaty because they believe that the Aachen Treaty make the Germany stronger, and they think they should share French the diplomatic position with the German people. So, but this trend was not new, and I think this kind of the far right trend has been ongoing since maybe 1990s. So the Aachen Treaty and especially the Article 8 of the Aachen Treaty triggered the extreme the counter movement of the reconciliation or cooperation of France and Germany. So, but so far, this kind of the counter movement didn't make any change of the relation between two countries. But if the far right party got they get the power, I think it will not be possible. But if the far right party got the power, then the kind of Aachen Treaty will be they make another kind of a treaty, or another kind of they make another kind of relations between the two countries. But so far, this kind of the far-right movement didn't influence much for the treaty or agreement between the countries. Yeah, I hope this relationship will endure. Yeah, even though there are some this kind of the far-right movement. Okay.
Professor Oh, I have one question about
Yeah.
the acceptance of Aachen Treaty to the people. I mean, how the negotiation and also contents of the treaty were delivered and made known, made public to the people. Do you have any idea how the public opinion was responding to this Aachen Treaty? And Lisbon Treaty is well known, but the Aachen Treaty is quite new. So,
actually, this question is my next subject of the research.
okay.
So I need more time for researching about this question, more public opinion level of the or perception of the Aachen Treaty. So I'll try to make the answer in the next.
I got it. I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Next
yes.
research. Okay.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think there is no further question and no further comment on. Is there any?
We got one question in the chat room from YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
whose question is it? Yusewan? Okay.
I'm trying to find the chat now, but
You are in the 독서실,
okay.
so you put in chat room. Can you read, Professor?
Patient for long term. There are many questions here. Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that especially for the younger generation in South Korea and Japan, the issue of reconciliation may not be the first order of their future. But if I think we can think differently. I think I believe that Korean younger generation does not feel victimized or humiliated by the Japanese colonial history, and Korea now has enough soft power and competitiveness. So I think collective memory is the thing of the past. So the Korea-Japan young generation can talk about what we can gain together in the future through more cooperation. So the last question is a little bit pessimistic atmosphere, but I think this is under the chance. This time is under the chance for a new cooperation and new reconciliation between Korea, Japan, young generation. I don't think the younger generation should follow the values of the older generation. So the next generation can make their new future. So I think it can be a new chance for the reconciliation. Yeah, that's my answer. Thank you. Okay.
I understand how the young generation would feel about the reconciliation with Japan, because we have a lot of house homework to do at home, right? For instance, we have high unemployment, increasing household debts, and also we have housing price problems, and so on and so forth. COVID-19, including that problem. We have a lot homeworks to do at home, and why should we pay attention to the reconciliation with Japan? But if you take a look at the European case. As mentioned by and explained by Professor Oh, we have got a very hostile relationship between France and Germany for decades and for centuries. However, they are now friends. They have become friends, and they are now playing the role of tandem for the leadership of European integration. And the question here is, why not between Korea and Japan? Can we do, for instance, this role? Can we assign this role to China to lead the regional prosperity and global leadership to China? Or can we live without the Japanese and Chinese? So also to China as well, we have to have the same and similar question, right? How to improve the bilateral relations, or if possible, trilateral relations, so that the peaceful coexistence can be a fundament for the future prosperity. That is the long-term view of or long-term perspective we have to have when we are students and when we are in the international relations. That is my personal intention, but also I'm confident that this is very important for the nation as a whole. Okay, if you have no further questions, then let us conclude our today's session, special lecture. Why don't you give big hands to Professor Oh? He has given us a really very interesting and implicative presentation. And also thank you, Professor Yu and Professor Yoon, to participate in the meeting. And thank you all for attending this meeting. And I hope to see you again on Thursday for Professor Belsik's special lecture. He's talking about EU-Asia connectivity, right? Concept. He's a political scientist. He's also a political economist, long-lasting colleague and friend of mine. And he's well known in Asian society as well. He's expert on Asia-Europe relations as well. And he's a Chang Monnet chair. And you will learn a lot from him. So let's meet again on Thursday. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
수고했습니다.
수고 많으셨습니다, 교수님.
수고하셨습니다.
네, 수고했어요.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.
수고하셨습니다.
민지 다음에 보자.
이걸 두 개 틀었는데.
근데 이게 끊기네.